You are listening to Now That's a Good Question, a podcast series powered by SuRC, where changemakers from across the world answer your queries on sustainable lifestyle. After all, it's not just good on you, but also for the earth.
Hi, I'm Kristy Durtman, founder of Brown Girl Green, a podcast series that's dedicated towards diversity, equity, justice, and inclusion in the environmental movement, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. Welcome to another episode of Now That's a Good Question, powered by SuRC. In today's episode, I'm going to be answering a few common questions on the topic that's making the maximum buzz: how to embrace a sustainable lifestyle. Let's start the episode with the first question. So the first question asks, what inspired you to lead a sustainable lifestyle? Well, I would say that what led me to want to live more sustainably is basically just thinking about my connection to what I was consuming, what I was wasting, and just like what is my role in it. And also just like what are ways that I can, do my part in my own everyday life to be able to reduce my waste in any way that's possible. And I would say that it's more about like shifting the mindset that like everyone has about like, needing to consume so much so quickly, to have like, the nicest, shiniest things that you're only going to have for like, maybe a couple of months, you're going to throw it out. I really wanted to figure out, how can I challenge my own mindset on that to really invest into the items that I own so I could, consequently like waste less. And yeah, I would say that leads me to the second question, which asks, what are some easy eco-friendly swaps that individuals can make in their daily lives? I'd say some easy ones are, instead of buying, a bunch of plastic single-use items, you can buy items that are more reusable. There's like reusable safety razors for shaving. There's bamboo toothbrushes that, are not going to degrade and release plastic into the environment. There's reusable cotton swabs, reusable water bottles, things like that are really easy eco-friendly swaps that the way I like to think about it is like, could I buy an item like this, like for instance, like a single-use bottle, and just say, oh, if I just had a bottle and you live in an area or a region where, there is clean drinking water or infrastructure to do that, you could easily have a reusable instead of buying a bunch of plastic water bottles, for instance. And yeah, I would say that like, it can be really challenging to make some of these swaps because they're not always the most accessible to everyone. But I would say like, being able to do one or two things to try to, reduce the amount of things that you're buying and using on a consistent basis overall is going to reduce your waste in the long term. And the third question asks, should one immediately switch to eco-friendly products in order to start a sustainable lifestyle? I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's about like being able to figure out the things, like being able to take inventory for the things that you own and figure out like, okay, could I buy less of this item? Or did I need to even buy this item at all? And trying to figure out, are there items that you can buy that are going to last a much longer time than single use? I think that those are really key and easy ways for you to reduce your waste in the long term. And fourth question asks, can you name some products and lifestyle choices that may seem environmentally friendly but actually aren't? I would say that like here in the US, there's a lot of like buzzwords around things like biodegradable or compostable plastic. Even though that sounds great, you can't actually toss that plastic into your compost bin. It has to be in an area that actually industrially composts your plastic. And so even if you like buy something like an object that says that, it's good for the planet, it's going to compost, that's actually not true. And so I always like to tell people that one. I would also say that another lifestyle choice that's not necessarily environmentally friendly, like I was saying before, is like maybe you're buying like these sustainable products, but then you just keep buying more sustainable products. Like, sure, like at the end of the day, once you throw them out, like, or if you ever throw them out, they're not going to have the same kind of footprint compared to maybe a single-use item. but you're still buying more things that you don't necessarily need. And so I think that that's also part of the issue. Like, if you're going to have even sustainable sourced items, you should still limit your consumption of those as well, because it still requires like resources and energy to make that happen. And then I would say the last thing is just like even renewable energy, like solar and wind. Even though like obviously we want to move towards renewable energy in the future, the way that it's currently being produced right now isn't the most environmentally friendly, but that doesn't mean that can't change. But I think it's important that people educate themselves about, you know, how can we also make sure that like as we're building quote unquote clean energy, that it actually is good for the environment too. And yeah, and so I would say that the fifth question says, holidays, occasions, and festivities form an important part of our lives, but they lead to a lot of waste. How can one celebrate mindfully? Again, I think like it's obviously going to take more effort to like do things like washing dishes and things like that, but you could at least try to buy items that are made out of products that are actually going to degrade. So like buying like paper plates instead of ones that, you know, have wax where it's not going to be as recyclable, or plastic plates, which are definitely not as recyclable. I think also just like if you want to like totally reduce your waste, like having people bring their own plate, wash their own plate, like having a setup to where like, you know, people can reduce the amount of waste that you even need in terms of prepping your holidays. I would say also like serving, you know, more plant-based meals that don't actually have as much meat or dairy, like being able to vary that up is really helpful. I would say also like instead of like using typical wrapping paper, reusing like paper bags or like other materials that you already have on hand, or even using cloth or fabric that you can just use to wrap items instead of like having to get these single-use items. I think that you can still have that nice impact of like having something that feels like very classy and polished while also like not having to produce more unnecessary waste. And I mean, I ran through a lot of information, so we're getting towards the end of the episode, but I'm excited to get into finishing off with some more of my thoughts on sustainable lifestyles. The sixth question asks, can you guide our listeners to some books and resources on sustainability? Yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend a book called Hope is a Verb. I'd recommend a book called Black Faces, Green Spaces, Dumping in Dixie, and Clean and White, A History of Environmental Racism in the United States. I'd also recommend checking out my podcast, The Brown Girl Green Show. There's also a podcast called The Yikes Podcast that gets into some of these issues. And I would also, you know, always check out like the UN Sustainable Development Goals to understand more about those and like what is actually happening on like a worldwide level to try to address environmental sustainability. And yeah, I would say the last thing is to be able to like take inventory of the things that you own yourself, which is not something you necessarily need to look up on the internet, and be able to start actually like writing about or understanding your relationship with, you know, the things you own, consume, throw out on a daily basis. And I think it will ultimately change your relationship with how you live sustainably. And here's the last question. This was a question that made me feel like it was like, now that's a good question. I would say the question asked, if corporations are to blame for the majority of environmental destruction in the world, like why should individuals even switch to a sustainable lifestyle? And my answer to that is about how we need to change like global consumer culture. Obviously, it's not wrong to like want nice things and to be able to, you know, purchase new or nice things to, you know, I know that it helps build my self-confidence, helps make me feel good. But I think it's about the quantity of what we own and what we need. I think it's always good to be mindful of that because it challenges the people around us to also be more mindful of our environment, not just in nature, but also within our households. I think it's important, as much as it is to also hold companies and corporations accountable, that we also on an individual level are challenging, you know, our collective consciousness around these issues, and, you know, really encouraging our friends and family that these things do matter and that what you are wasting here in your home is going to make an impact. And I think that that's just important in creating the conversations we need. So that way the world knows that like people are paying attention and that companies who we are holding accountable can no longer, wait to come up with more sustainable solutions. So that way a sustainable lifestyle can be accessible for everyone. So with all that being said, thank you so much for tuning in to my episode of Now That's a Good Question with me, Kristy Durtman. You can follow me at Brown Girl Green on social media. Join in next Friday with another Changemaker. See you next time.
Thank you for tuning in. See you next week with another segment of Now That's a Good Question, powered by SuRC.